In 1974, in a quiet English town called Ossett, faith and fear collided in a way that would haunt the nation for decades. A man said to be possessed by demons would go on to commit one of the most horrifying crimes in British history. Only a year earlier, The Exorcist had shocked audiences around the world, a film that made millions believe in the dark power of possession. But what happened next in England blurred the line between horror fiction and reality. Because this wasn't a movie, this was real. Michael Taylor wasn't a stranger to his neighbours. He was a husband, a father, a simple man with a quiet life and a kind smile. But somewhere between his growing obsession with religion and a disturbing series of exorcisms, that calm exterior began to crack. And beneath it, something far darker started to emerge. What began as an act of faith would soon end in blood. The story of Michael Taylor became a grim legend, a warning about the dangers of blind belief, guilt, and a mind pushed past its breaking point. Was Michael Taylor truly possessed by evil forces? Or was this the tragic unraveling of a man consumed by fear, guilt, and fanaticism? Before we dive into the horrifying events of that night, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves true horror stories, and subscribe for more real-life cases where faith, fear, and madness collide. Because tonight, we're walking into one of the darkest chapters in Britain's history. The Michael Taylor Exorcism. When faith becomes fear. Since this is quite an old case, we were able to extract only a limited number of images. We will be displaying those. So let's get started. Michael Taylor was born in 1938 in the small Yorkshire town of Ossett, a place where everyone knew each other, where life was simple, predictable, and ordinary. He was the kind of man most people wouldn't look twice at, a gentle working-class husband and father of 5. Neighbours described him as kind, soft-spoken, and deeply devoted to his family. He worked as a butcher, an odd job man, the kind who always had time for a friendly word or a helping hand. To most, Michael Taylor seemed like the picture of normalcy, a man grounded in faith, family, and routine. But in the early 1970s, something began to change. Seeking comfort and purpose, Michael and his wife Christine became increasingly active in their local church. They joined a small Christian fellowship group, one that promised spiritual renewal and divine healing. The group was led by a young woman named Marie Robinson. Charismatic, passionate, and deeply spiritual, Marie believed in miracles, in the power of prayer, the Holy Spirit, and speaking in tongues. To many in Ossett, she was inspiring, even magnetic. Michael was drawn to her. Not romantically at first, but spiritually. He admired her devotion, her energy, her certainty. For a man searching for meaning, Marie seemed like a light in the dark. But that light would soon become an obsession. As their bond deepened, the lines between faith and emotion began to blur. Michael's wife Christine grew suspicious, sensing something was not right, not just with her husband's faith, but with his mind. And before long, the prayer meetings that once promised peace and healing would take a dark and dangerous turn. It began subtly, an extra smile here, a lingering glance there. Michael Taylor's connection with Marie Robinson grew deeper with every prayer meeting. To the outside world, it looked like a friendship forged in faith. 2 people joined by a shared devotion to God. But those who knew the Taylors began to notice something different, something unsettling. Marie had a powerful effect on Michael. Her presence seemed to lift him, energize him, even intoxicate him. He began attending meetings obsessively, spending hours with her in prayer and conversation, often late into the night. He spoke of her constantly, how she was filled with the Holy Spirit, how God spoke through her. It was as if Marie had become his spiritual anchor, and Christine, his wife, could feel herself slipping further and further away from the man she loved. Whispers began to spread within the small community that Michael's devotion had crossed a line. that he and Marie's relationship was no longer purely spiritual. Christine confronted him, desperate to understand what was happening. But Michael denied any wrongdoing, insisting their bond was blessed by God. One night, during a fellowship meeting, Christine couldn't hold her silence any longer. In front of the entire group, she accused Michael and Marie of having an affair. The room fell silent until Michael snapped. Witnesses would later describe what happened next as something beyond human. His face twisted in rage, his body trembled, and his voice, usually calm and soft, erupted into violent screams. He cursed, shouted obscenities, and began speaking in strange tongues. Some claimed his eyes went dark, that his expression changed into something inhuman. Others swore they saw him convulsing, as if wrestling with an unseen force. Marie tried to calm him, but Michael screamed that he could see evil in her, that she was possessed by the devil himself. The peaceful prayer meeting had turned into a scene of chaos and terror. From that night forward, the group believed Michael was no longer himself. They were convinced he had fallen under demonic influence. His friends prayed over him constantly, anointing him with oil, reciting verses, and pleading with God to free him. But no prayer seemed to work. Michael's behaviour grew darker. Mood swings, outbursts, strange voices. He told people he could feel something inside him, clawing to get out. His once gentle demeanour was replaced by paranoia and aggression. Those who saw him during this time said he looked haunted, hollow-eyed, restless, and frightened of his own thoughts. His faith, once a source of comfort, had turned into a consuming obsession, and soon the church would decide there was only one way to save him: an exorcism. It was the night of October 5th, 1974. The kind of night when the air itself feels heavy, when silence presses against the windows and shadows seem to breathe. In the small English town of Ossett, the ancient stones of St. Thomas Church stood cold and still under a blanket of dark clouds. The wind carried faint echoes of the church bell, slow, solemn, and uncertain, as if tolling for something it did not yet understand. Inside the dimly lit nave, a handful of figures gathered. Among them was Father Peter Vincent, the local Anglican priest, a man of faith, known for his calm authority. Beside him stood Reverend Raymond Smith, a younger, more zealous clergyman whose belief in spiritual warfare ran deep. Both men had seen their share of troubled souls, but neither could have imagined the darkness that was about to unfold within those stone walls. Several parish members had volunteered to assist, standing nervously in the pews with candles trembling in their hands. Their faces were pale, the flames reflecting in wide, fearful eyes. They clutched their Bibles tightly, whispering silent prayers. The scent of burning wax and incense filled the air, mingling with something else, something colder. Then the doors creaked open. Michael Taylor entered. He looked like a man already half consumed. His face was ashen, his clothes dishevelled. Sweat glistened on his brow despite the chill. His eyes darted around the church, unfocused, as if seeing something no one else could. Witnesses would later say he muttered constantly, broken phrases about evil under his skin, about something moving inside him that wanted out. Father Vincent tried to calm him, laying a reassuring hand on his shoulder, but Michael flinched as though the touch burned him. Reverend Smith began setting up the altar, a silver crucifix, a bowl of holy water, and a vial of consecrated oil. He opened the Book of Common Prayer, its pages marked and worn from years of use, and began to read the opening psalms. But even before the first prayer was fully spoken, those present said they felt something shift in the room. The temperature seemed to drop. The air thickened, heavy and unmoving. The candles flickered violently, casting long, trembling shadows against the ancient stone walls. One witness would later tell police that the silence had a weight to it, like the church itself was holding its breath. Father Vincent led the group in low, rhythmic chanting, invoking God's protection. The sound echoed off the high arches, soft at first, then rising, building, filling the space with a strange harmony that felt both sacred and terrifying. Every word seemed to fight against an unseen resistance. Michael began to tremble. His breathing quickened. He clutched at his chest, gasping as if suffocating under invisible hands. The priests exchanged a glance and a mix of pity and dread. This was not just prayer anymore. It was the opening of a battle. As the first hour of the ritual began, the atmosphere in St. Thomas's was almost unbearable. The mixture of fear, faith, and flickering candlelight blurred the line between divine and diabolical. What began as a sacred rite of deliverance was already slipping into something darker, something that felt closer to madness than to salvation. And yet they pressed on, convinced they were facing not a man's illness, but a legion of demons. The night had only begun, and by dawn, faith itself would be tested in ways none of them could ever forget. The ceremony began in solemn order, candles flickering, the echo of whispered prayers bouncing off the cold stone. Father Peter Vincent raised the crucifix, his voice trembling slightly as he began to read from the Psalms. "Deliver us from evil," he murmured, tracing the sign of the cross in the air before Michael Taylor. Reverend Raymond Smith joined in, his tone sharp and commanding, invoking the name of Christ against the unclean spirits said to dwell within the man. At first, Michael knelt quietly before the altar, eyes closed, hands shaking. His breathing was shallow but steady. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though prayer might bring calm. But then, without warning, a deep guttural roar tore through the silence. It wasn't a human sound. Michael's head snapped back, and he began screaming, the kind of scream that claws at the walls and rattles through bone. His body convulsed violently, thrashing against the floor, his face twisted in something between agony and fury. Witnesses would later say his voice changed, at times high and sharp, at others low and bestial, as if more than one presence was fighting to speak through him. The priests pressed on. Father Vincent sprinkled holy water across Michael's face and chest, his prayers rising louder to drown out the chaos. Reverend Smith read from the Gospel of Mark, commanding, "Come out of him, unclean spirit, and never return." The words felt heavy, echoing through the sanctuary like thunder. For hours the struggle raged. Michael's behaviour swung wildly, one moment laughing hysterically, the next sobbing like a child. He shouted obscenities, blasphemies, and passages of scripture in a mocking tone. Then came the growling, animalistic, guttural noises that made the witnesses' blood run cold. At one point, Michael lunged forward, biting the arm of one of the assistants and tearing at his own clothes. Blood spattered onto the stone floor. "You cannot kill me!" he screamed, his eyes rolling back into his head. "I am many!" The room was chaos, overlapping voices of prayer and pleading, the crackle of candlelight, the sound of flesh striking wood as Michael thrashed against the pews. Some witnesses swore they saw the candles flicker and dim all at once, as if an unseen wind had passed through the church. Others claimed the crucifix on the wall trembled slightly, though no one dared to move or stop to look. Father Vincent's voice cracked as he shouted the next prayer. "Lord, deliver this man from the powers of darkness." Reverend Smith followed, splashing holy water over Michael's head. The scent of oil, sweat, and fear filled the room. The hours dragged on, past midnight into the early hours of morning. The prayers grew hoarse, the witnesses pale and trembling. Michael's body shook violently, then went eerily still. His breathing slowed, and for a moment the silence was unbearable. Father Vincent finally lowered his crucifix and whispered, barely audible, "It is done." Later he would tell reporters and investigators that 40 demons had been cast out that night, each one representing sin itself: lust, envy, pride, greed, blasphemy, hatred, and more. But he said grimly, one demon remained, the demon of murder. By the time the church bells rang faintly in the distance, it was 1 a.m. The group was drained beyond words. Some sat slumped against the walls, eyes glassy with shock. Others wept quietly into their hands. And there in the centre of the chaos, Michael Taylor lay trembling on the floor, covered in holy oil, tear-streaked and shaking like a man who had stared into something too dark for human eyes. The night had been long, brutal and unholy, and though they believed the evil had left him, none of them realised, not yet, that the worst was still to come. As the first light of dawn seeped through the stained glass windows of St. Thomas Church, the atmosphere was heavy with exhaustion, fear, and an uneasy relief. The 7-hour ordeal had finally ended. Michael Taylor lay sprawled on the cold stone floor, trembling uncontrollably. His clothes were shredded from his violent thrashing, his skin glistening with a mixture of sweat and the remnants of holy oil. His breathing was ragged, uneven, as though each inhale and exhale required immense effort. Father Peter Vincent bent over him, murmuring a final prayer of deliverance. He traced the sign of the cross across Michael's forehead and whispered blessings intended to seal the victory of the exorcism. To him it seemed the unclean spirits had finally departed. He exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and fatigue washing over him. But Reverend Raymond Smith remained uneasy. His eyes never left Michael's face, studying every twitch and subtle movement. In his later accounts, Smith admitted he sensed a presence that had not entirely left. One demon refused to go, he confided to authorities months later. The demon of murder. The words hung in the morning air, unnoticed by most, but heavy with foreboding. The priests helped Michael to his feet, supporting his trembling frame. He leaned weakly against them, distant and hollow-eyed. Witnesses described his gaze as unseeing, glassy, as though part of his consciousness had slipped away during the exorcism and never returned. Though he appeared physically present, the fire in his eyes had been replaced by a chilling vacancy, a void that seemed to hint at something still lingering within him. Despite the unease, the priests concluded the ritual. They conducted one final blessing over Michael, invoking protection for his home, his family, and his soul. They reassured themselves, and perhaps each other, that the battle was over. Michael would return to his wife, Christine, to rest and recover. The church doors were opened, and the morning sun spilled across the nave, illuminating the remnants of a night of terror. Overturned chairs, melted candle wax, and a lingering, almost palpable tension that refused to dissipate. As Michael walked home with the priest's assistants, the streets of Ossett began to stir with early morning life. Birds chirped faintly, oblivious to the darkness that had transpired hours before. The townspeople, unaware of the night's horrors, would soon be shaken by events that no one could have anticipated. Inside, Michael's mind was a maelstrom of exhaustion and residual possession. Although the priests believed they had weakened the evil, they had failed to notice the subtle, terrifying traces of its presence. Every step he took, every slight twitch hinted at an unfinished battle, a lingering shadow that would soon erupt in a way that no prayer, no blessing could contain. They thought the ritual had ended. They thought the danger had passed. But for Michael Taylor, the true horror was only beginning. The demon that remained was patient, silent, and deadly, and it wouldn't rest until its dark purpose was fulfilled. It was just past 9 in the morning, the pale October sun casting long shadows over the quiet streets of Ossett, Yorkshire. Shops were opening, smoke curled from chimneys, and a few early risers strolled along the sidewalks, exchanging casual greetings. Among them walked Michael Taylor, gaunt and hollow-eyed, moving with a strange hesitant shuffle. The night's ordeal at St. Thomas Church had left him drained, his body trembling, yet something deeper, an unseen, sinister force, seemed to pulse beneath his skin. The faint scent of incense and holy oil clung to his tattered clothes, a haunting reminder of the hours he'd spent wrestling with unseen demons. Neighbours glanced at him with mild curiosity. He muttered under his breath, words indistinct but heavy with urgency. Some assumed it was simply exhaustion from another of his frenzied episodes. A man so entwined with the church and the spiritual battles he believed in that this was just another ritual of life. No one could have guessed the darkness trailing behind him, waiting to erupt. Inside the modest, well-kept home he shared with his wife, Christine Taylor, the morning seemed ordinary. Christine had endured months of anxiety, confusion, and fear. She had watched her husband descend into obsession, had witnessed the transformation of a gentle man into someone consumed by visions, voices, and terror. Today she greeted him quietly, her voice soft but laced with concern. "Are you all right now, love?" she asked, her words tentative. Some witnesses later suggested she might have been firm, questioning his behaviour, confronting the unexplained intensity of the previous night's events. The moment Michael crossed the threshold, the air in the room seemed to shift. Something invisible, malevolent, and unrelenting had followed him home. The emotional strain, the spiritual fervour, and the lingering remnants of his ordeal collided inside him. A tension that had been building for months, an amalgamation of fear, guilt, obsession, and exhaustion, exploded. Within minutes, what began as a quiet morning transformed into a scene of unimaginable chaos. The voices, the mania, and the dark presence that had been partially exorcised hours before surged through Michael uncontainable. He moved erratically, his eyes glassy, pupils dilated, his face twisting in expressions no one could recognize. Neighbours later reported hearing a sudden, horrific scream that shattered the fragile calm of the early day. The sound was raw, primal, a mixture of rage, anguish, and something terrifyingly inhuman. Inside the house, Christine's attempts to calm him proved futile. The protective walls of the home could not contain the fury that had taken hold. In those few minutes, the culmination of months of obsession, fear, and unresolved spiritual turmoil overtook Michael completely. Outside, a neighbour's kettle boiled over, a dog barked faintly, and the normalcy of dawn hung in fragile contrast to the horror unfolding within. The quiet morning of Ossett was about to be forever scarred. No one knew that within minutes, their home would become the scene of unimaginable horror. Whatever had followed Michael from the church that night was no longer restrained. It was free, and it would not be silent. Around 9:30, the quiet morning of Ossett shattered. A scream tore through the streets, shrill, raw, and impossibly human and inhuman all at once. Windows rattled, shutters shook, and neighbours froze in their homes, hearts pounding as the sound repeated. One witness later told police, "It didn't sound human. I can't even describe it. It was like the voice of a wild animal, but more something else." Inside the Taylor household, chaos had erupted. Michael, still pale and trembling, transformed in an instant. His hands, once gentle and protective, became instruments of unthinkable violence. He lunged at his wife, Christine, and what followed was described by investigators as an act of pure animalistic fury. There were no weapons, no preparation, only the raw force of a man overtaken by something beyond comprehension. Christine tried to defend herself, pleading and crying, but nothing could stop the onslaught. Michael's hands tore at her face, ripping away what should never have been touched. Her eyes and tongue were ripped out in a frenzy that seemed both deliberate and frenzied, and the room was soon a scene of incomprehensible carnage. Blood spattered the walls, the furniture was broken and overturned, and the once orderly home became a tableau of terror. Even the family dog, a small and typically gentle companion, fell victim to his wrath. Witnesses described the horror of finding it torn apart in the living room, adding to the surreal brutality. Forensic photographs, though never released to the public, horrified seasoned detectives. Even those accustomed to violent crime struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. Officers who arrived on the scene later reported needing psychological counselling to process what they witnessed. The violence was immediate, unstoppable, and utterly incomprehensible. There were no signs of planning, no ritual objects, no knives, no motives in anger or revenge, only a man consumed entirely by an uncontrollable force. Neighbours whispered in disbelief. How could a man who had always been gentle, kind, and devoted to his family transform into a creature capable of such brutality? For many it was proof that the darkness from St. Thomas Church had followed Michael home. Whatever had seized him that night, the fear, the mania, the supposed demons, had not been expelled. It had merely waited until the confines of his home, his most personal and vulnerable space, to finish its work. The room eventually fell silent, but the echo of what had transpired lingered in the minds of everyone who would hear of it. It was not an act of reason, nor simple rage. It was something primal, something alien to human understanding. It was not murder by reason or anger. It was something primal, something that defied human explanation. Whatever had taken hold of Michael Taylor that night had consumed him completely, leaving only destruction in its wake. Within minutes of the final screams, frantic neighbours called the local police, reporting sounds that no one could rationally explain. Piercing shrieks, crashing furniture, and guttural growls that seemed to echo from another world. Officers arrived on the quiet Ossett street, unsure of what awaited them. The sun had barely risen, and the town's usual morning calm was shattered by the chilling echoes of violence. In the middle of the cobblestone street, they found Michael Taylor staggering aimlessly. Completely naked, his body smeared in blood, he walked with a strange, unsteady gait. His wide, delirious eyes darted from officer to officer, and his voice rang out in chaotic proclamations. "It is the blood of Satan." Each word sent a shiver down the spines of even the most seasoned constables. They paused, unsure whether they were dealing with a deranged man, a killer, or something they could not explain. As the officers approached, Michael did not resist. He murmured incoherently, sometimes pleading, sometimes laughing, sometimes whispering fragments of phrases. "It's gone. It's all gone now. They cannot touch me." His trembling frame and glassy, distant eyes painted a picture of a mind shattered beyond recognition. Inside the Taylor home, investigators were met with a scene that defied comprehension. Blood coated every surface, the furniture was destroyed, and Christine Taylor's body lay in unthinkable mutilation. One officer reportedly vomited upon entering, unable to reconcile the sight with any known reality. Another described later in his statement that he felt as though we had crossed into a nightmare that logic could not reach. The official police reports reflected the horror. The phrase "beyond human comprehension" appeared repeatedly. Detectives meticulously documented the carnage, noting the absence of any conventional motive, weapon, or premeditation, only sheer primal violence. Word of the incident spread like wildfire through Ossett. Locals whispered in hushed tones of possession and exorcisms gone awry. Fear gripped the town as reality collided with the supernatural rumours that had circulated for months about Michael's strange behaviour and the night at St. Thomas Church. The priests who had conducted the exorcism were summoned not to perform another ritual, but to testify before authorities. They were forced to recount the 7-hour ordeal, the claimed expulsion of 40 demons, and the one demon that had reportedly remained. Their accounts, once a matter of spiritual duty, were now central to a criminal investigation, further blurring the line between faith and law, between belief and horror. And so the tragic saga of Michael Taylor began its most public chapter. A small town, once quiet and unremarkable, became the stage for a story that would haunt the nation. a story of faith turned to terror, of a man overwhelmed by forces both internal and possibly beyond understanding. Whatever was inside him that night, real or imagined, had taken full control. When police first apprehended Michael Taylor, they had braced themselves for a violent confrontation. Instead, they found a man unnervingly calm, his body trembling slightly, but his demeanour distant, as if he were watching events unfold from somewhere far removed. At the station, he sat quietly in the interrogation room, hands folded, eyes glassy and vacant, occasionally murmuring phrases that made no linear sense. "It is gone. The evil has left me. I am free." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that this was no ordinary criminal. The crime scene haunted the investigators. A home drenched in blood, furniture ripped apart, a body mutilated beyond recognition, and yet no weapon had been used. The sheer ferocity of Michael's actions defied human logic. Detectives repeatedly recounted that they had never encountered a case where bare hands alone caused such devastation. The violence was primal, uncontrolled, and terrifying. Psychiatric doctors were brought in immediately. Over several days, Michael underwent exhaustive evaluation. He exhibited intense paranoia, hearing voices, extreme religious delusions, hallucinations, and periods of complete dissociation. He spoke of being attacked by unseen forces, of darkness filling his mind, and of a demon that refused to leave. Clinicians diagnosed him with a severe psychotic break, likely precipitated by months of sleep deprivation, emotional strain, and obsessive religious fervour. They noted the immediacy. His collapse into violence followed directly after the all-night exorcism at St. Thomas Church, where priests had claimed to expel 40 demons, and yet warned that one remained, the demon of murder. Detectives struggled to reconcile medical explanations with the timing and circumstances. One officer later commented, "If this was madness, the exorcism was the spark that ignited it." Local residents whispered in hushed tones that the priest's ritual had failed, that the sacred rites had torn open something within Michael that could not be closed. Fear spread throughout Ossett, with neighbours debating whether Michael had been a man possessed by evil forces or a human whose fragile mind had been pushed past the breaking point. The police were under intense pressure. While some members of the community leaned into supernatural explanations, investigators needed facts. Evidence, witness statements, and forensic reports were meticulously compiled. The intersection of faith and mental illness complicated every step. Interviews with the priest themselves only added to the tension, as they claimed they had genuinely confronted demonic forces and had believed they were acting in the man's spiritual best interest. Ultimately, the case exemplified a collision of worlds: secular law grappling with religious belief, psychiatric science confronting fervent faith, and a community forced to confront horror that could be explained by either or both. In the quiet halls of the police station, the central question loomed over every decision. Was this the catastrophic outcome of a mind unravelling under pressure, or had the exorcism unleashed something darker than comprehension? In the quiet halls of the station, the questions began. Was this the work of a mind unravelling, or had the exorcism opened a door that should never have been touched? In March 1975, Leeds Crown Court became the stage for one of the most bizarre and chilling trials in modern British history. The courtroom was overflowing. Journalists crowded the benches, priests and religious leaders observed from the gallery, psychologists and psychiatrists prepared their notes, and townspeople whispered nervously about the events that had unfolded in Ossett just months prior. Everyone was there to witness how the legal system would attempt to explain a murder so horrific it seemed almost beyond human comprehension. The prosecution opened with a harrowing account of Christine Taylor's death. They described in meticulous detail the blood-soaked scene, the mutilation, the chaos, the visceral horror of Michael's actions. Each word seemed to reverberate through the courtroom, drawing gasps from the audience. Witnesses recounted Michael's bizarre behaviour following the exorcism, his wild eyes, guttural shouting, and the chilling declaration, "It is the blood of Satan." The evidence left no room for ambiguity about the severity and brutality of the crime. The defence, however, built a narrative that reframed the horror through the lens of mental illness. They argued that Michael Taylor was not guilty by reason of insanity. Their central claim was startling yet compelling. The all-night exorcism at St. Thomas Church had pushed a fragile mind past its breaking point. Hours of screaming prayers, physical restraints, and the invocation of demons had created a psychological pressure cooker, ultimately triggering a full psychotic episode. Psychiatric experts testified that Michael's mental state had been severely compromised by months of religious obsession, sleep deprivation, and emotional strain, and that the exorcism acted as the catalyst for a catastrophic breakdown. Father Peter Vincent and Reverend Raymond Smith, the priests who had performed the exorcism, were called to the stand. Both admitted that the ritual had been intense, relentless, and crucially incomplete. They stated that despite expelling 40 demons, one remained, the demon of murder. This admission sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. For many, it implied that the exorcism itself had left something unfinished, something potentially lethal. The very faith meant to protect had, inadvertently, created conditions for tragedy. The judge and jury faced a profound moral and legal dilemma. On one hand, the evidence clearly depicted a man who had committed a hideous act of violence. On the other, the psychological testimony painted a portrait of a mind shattered by an extreme religious ritual. Could a man be held fully responsible for actions taken in a state of complete psychosis? Could the law account for the influence of fervent belief on a susceptible mind? After careful deliberation, the court reached a verdict. Michael Taylor was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was immediately committed to Broadmoor Secure Hospital, one of Britain's most notorious psychiatric institutions, for intensive treatment and evaluation. He would spend 2 years under strict care before being transferred to a lesser facility and eventually released under medical supervision. The public reaction was intense and polarised. Some accepted the ruling, recognising Michael as a victim of both his fragile mental state and the misguided religious practices of the priests. Others whispered darkly, convinced that Ossett had truly been touched by something unearthly, that a demon had walked through its streets, leaving devastation in its wake. In the end, the court absolved him of guilt, but the questions lingered. Did the church unleash something dark within Michael Taylor, or merely awaken a darkness that was already there? As news of the Michael Taylor case spread, Britain was gripped by a mixture of fear, fascination, and outrage. Headlines screamed from broadsheets and tabloids alike: "The Exorcism murder, demon or madman, faith turned fatal in Ossett." The timing only amplified public shock. Just a year earlier, The Exorcist had terrified moviegoers worldwide, and now it seemed that real-life horror had stepped out of fiction and into the streets of Yorkshire. For many, the parallels were uncanny. A man allegedly possessed, an exorcism gone awry, a family destroyed. Newspapers ran detailed reconstructions of the crime, combining witness statements, psychiatric evaluations, and accounts of the exorcism. Journalists debated endlessly: was Michael Taylor truly under the influence of evil, or was he the tragic victim of religious extremism and untreated mental illness? Editorials questioned the responsibility of the priests, the role of the church, and the ethics of publicising such gruesome details. Letters poured into editors, with some readers expressing horror at the events, and others defending the idea of faith-based interventions gone wrong. Church authorities were swift to distance themselves from the incident. The Anglican Church emphasised that the priests had acted without full oversight and warned against unregulated exorcisms. Statements from bishops and church councils condemned the ritual as unorthodox and dangerous, stressing that spiritual guidance should never endanger life. Religious leaders around the country faced uncomfortable questions. How could deeply held faith, intended to heal, result in such unimaginable tragedy? Psychiatrists and medical professionals were equally vocal. They criticized the exorcism as reckless and potentially lethal, highlighting the dangers of conflating mental illness with demonic possession. Public debates erupted on television, radio, and in newspapers. Should spiritual healing ever replace proper medical care? Could the lines between faith and fanaticism be so easily crossed? Experts warned that vulnerable individuals, like Michael, could be pushed past the brink when mental health needs were ignored in favour of extreme religious interventions. The case became a moral mirror for society, reflecting deep anxieties about the power of belief, the limits of authority, and the consequences of unchecked zeal. In towns like Ossett, the trauma lingered. Neighbours whispered, children were warned, and even decades later, the story resurfaced in discussions of exorcisms gone wrong. It was not just a crime story, but a cautionary tale about the interplay between faith, obsession, and human fragility. The Michael Taylor case became more than a headline. It was a national reckoning. It forced Britain to ask uncomfortable questions. When does faith heal and when does it harm? When does belief protect and when does it destroy? After his release from Broadmoor Secure Hospital, Michael Taylor retreated from public life. He lived quietly, in relative obscurity, under psychiatric supervision, but the scars of that October night in 1974 never fully healed. Friends and acquaintances who remained in contact described him as withdrawn, haunted by memories he rarely spoke of, and burdened by a lifetime of guilt and fear. He avoided the spotlight entirely, knowing that the name Michael Taylor had become synonymous with horror, possession, and unthinkable violence. The Taylor case quickly became more than a local tragedy. It evolved into a subject of national and even international interest. Scholars, psychologists, and criminologists studied the events, dissecting the intersection of mental illness, religious obsession, and violent behaviour. Case studies in criminal psychology textbooks often reference Taylor as an example of psychosis exacerbated by extreme external stimuli. In this instance, an exorcism that pushed a fragile mind to the edge. Paranormal enthusiasts and occult researchers also seized on the story. To them, the Michael Taylor case was compelling evidence of demonic influence and spiritual warfare in modern times. Eyewitness accounts, the testimony of the priests, and the horrific aftermath became part of discussions in conferences, documentaries, and books examining possession, exorcism, and the supernatural. Some argue that it shows how deeply human belief can shape perception, and potentially unleash catastrophe when unchecked by reason. Beyond scholarly and paranormal circles, the case left an indelible mark on Ossett itself. Locals who remembered the events would speak of the night in hushed tones, describing it as a moment when ordinary life collided with something unthinkably dark. The case also prompted broader conversations within religious communities about the dangers of ritual practices performed without medical oversight or ethical constraints. Churches and spiritual leaders across the UK began reconsidering exorcism protocols, emphasising caution and the need to balance faith with care for vulnerable individuals. Ultimately, the story of Michael Taylor stands as a chilling testament to the power of belief and its potential to become as dangerous as any tangible threat. It is a reminder that human conviction, when combined with fear and fanaticism, can produce consequences as horrifying as those attributed to supernatural forces. The tragedy resonates beyond its immediate horror, offering lessons about the fragile boundary between faith and fanaticism, sanity and madness, devotion and destruction. The aftermath of Michael Taylor's story is not just about one man's downfall. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked belief, the fragility of the human mind, and the terrifying consequences when faith and fanaticism collide. Even decades later, it continues to haunt, a reminder that sometimes the most horrifying demons are the ones we create ourselves. A man, a priest, and a circle of believers, what began as a desperate fight for a soul became one of the darkest chapters in modern British history. A quiet town, a devoted family, and a community shaken to its core, all caught in a whirlwind of faith, fear, and unimaginable violence. Michael Taylor's story forces us to ask the unthinkable. Was he truly possessed by an otherworldly evil, a force that the priests and parishioners could not control? Or was he, a man already fragile and overwhelmed, ultimately destroyed by the very belief in that evil? The line between spiritual warfare and psychological collapse was blurred, perhaps fatally so. The horror of that October morning in 1974 continues to ripple through time, leaving questions that may never be answered. Eyewitness accounts, court documents, and psychiatric evaluations paint a complex picture, one that challenges our understanding of faith, sanity, and human nature. And yet, even now, decades later, Ossett remembers. The whispers, the fear, and the lessons remain, a chilling testament to what can happen when devotion turns to obsession and belief overshadows reason. If you want us to explore more real-life exorcisms and the stories behind the world's most terrifying claims of possession, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Michael Taylor was overtaken by something supernatural? Or was this a tragedy born entirely from human belief and psychological breakdown? Let us know in the comments below.